Hello and good evening, everybody, and good morning to the Canadians and the Americans listening. I'm speaking today to Akira, and I hope I get his surname right, Tokuhiro.
Tokuhiro,
He,
yeah.
Tokuhiro. He's a professor in Ontario Tech University, and he served on the American Nuclear Society's Presidential Committee on the um, Fukushima accident. And the topic today is obviously the Fukushima accident, and a few
Right.
weeks ago, there was water in there. So, Professor, welcome to this channel.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this. It's great to be on the podcast. I love it.
I want to sort of just get into Fukushima, and maybe we should start in 2011. What
Mhm.
what is your understanding of what happened during the accident?
Wow. I had to tell you, and I've said before in other podcasts, I wasn't really paying attention because I worked in 5 years in Japan, and there are earthquakes. Some of them are large, maybe not as large as this one, and there can be tsunamis. Uh, Often after larger earthquakes. But I knew it was a larger earthquake. And then when I heard, plants are made to shut down with the movements, right? So uh, I wasn't uh, I wasn't surprised by that. But then when I heard that they had an explosion, then I knew at right at that moment that they melted the core. There was hydrogen from the zirconium cladding degradation, and I knew it was serious. So, and then my phone started ringing, the emails started coming, and LinkedIn also. Actually, I use extensively to communicate and share information 24/7 with all over the world and with the experts, and so that was my first experience using social media to exchange information around the clock, right? So, yeah, no, it was, yeah, and the accident itself, then since the accident, finding out about the emergency response, the crisis management, a lot of, since 2000, it's already been 12 years. So, a lot of books and reports. Um, well, it's hindsight is always golden. You can always look
Right.
at what you can do better. So, um, yeah. So, and I went to Fukushima Daiichi this summer, right? And in July, with the World Nuclear University Summer Institute. So we were in Japan for 5 weeks, and we went to Fukushima Daiichi and saw in fact, and bringing our conversation to the current, we saw the facility. The TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, was kind enough to give us a tour of the tritium release facility just before several weeks after we visited the site, they had the official first release, right? So, and we saw all the tanks at the site,
Yeah.
right? 1,000 or more, roughly 1,000. But so, yeah, I've known about the accident. It's followed my career, and I've taught a course just on the accident itself, and at some past universities. And yeah, so, and we're juxtaposed with all the interest in nuclear power and SMR, small modular reactors. And that's part of my career because I was at NuScale. So I have a lot of interest in SMRs and nuclear energy, and also in our lifetime, right? A lot of talk about climate change and how we get to net zero.
Yeah.
It's clear to me that there's no way that any country in the world can get to, unless they already have an extensive hydro like British Columbia or Quebec. If they don't have nuclear power, then it makes it that much more difficult to get to net zero.
If not impossible. I mean,
Yes, yes,
I was here so I've obviously stayed in a few places now, but in France in 2018. Now France has mostly nuclear, but
right.
we still use a lot of fossil fuels for basic energy. And 2018, Macron increased the price of diesel with the idea that this is going to incentivize
Mhm.
usage of alternatives, and it didn't. It just sparked a quiet revolution, the Gilets jaunes. It wasn't that quiet, but this is a relative rich country, France.
Mhm.
I'm now looking at South Africa, my home country. We are the highest user of coal in the world. We're higher than China. And we have poverty and development. And
Yeah,
we
that
have one nuclear station, and nuclear is becoming it's whispered that I think it's more popular now than it was 5 or 10 years ago when I studied it. It's becoming a solution, although I think public support is not there yet. But the cloud that sort of hangs over the nuclear industry is Chernobyl and then Fukushima.
right.
And Fukushima, I guess Chernobyl you can justify can't occur because there's no containment around most buildings across the world. But Fukushima, it was a loss of coolant accident. It's pipes under pressure. And then I guess what concerned me about Fukushima is the response. And in your view, was our response proportionate to the danger that was given?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure that it's worth a lot of time to talk about because we can't change the response. So, um, so I'm working in the area of complexity in engineering systems, especially nuclear systems nowadays. And I have these metrics, higher level heuristics. So I talk about O2, P2, and that's just a communication. It's a communication tool. Is it on site? Is it off site? Have you prepared? Have you practiced? So that's the O2, P2, right? So, and that's a continuous improvement process. So I think Japan went through during the months in 2011, for example, one fact is they had various agencies and authorities had separate press conferences during the day. And it's only after some 30 days, a month, they decided to finally have a joint press conference. So if you have different press conferences during the day, the information is changing and you are bound to say something that's inconsistent or has a difference with what was previously said. So the importance in crisis management, crisis communication, and risk communication and risk communication and risk response is to have a joint press conference, right? So I hope that all over the world that lesson was really amplified and that lesson was, hopefully it's well understood by now all over
Well,
the world.
the thing that I went through media footages in the last year of Fukushima, and it was astonishing the scary predictions that came off that, and how BBC, for example, platformed people that were really scared. I mean, I believe their convictions were genuine, but they were just scared
Yeah.
people. Predicting this is another Chernobyl. Some people were making claims that the Japanese government was spreading radiation around to hide the cancer risk. This was on BBC. I mean, it's not a off-channel type of communication. And
Yeah.
so you would say that in itself was adding to the problem. Like you would have some communication strategy. I guess the critiques against that would argue that, but that sort of comes into free speech issues. How do you sort of, square that circle? They say, well, we're in a democratic country.
Yeah.
Is that even possible?
Yeah. So what we can say is we're 12 years beyond, and what we can say is that we live intensely in a world with social media that wasn't there in 2011. And a lot of it is video content, Instagram and TikTok and other things. So sure, we can say with respect to today's world, a lot of things, I think, on how we need to do better. But also, I guess the point I wanted to make was that there is the technical perspective or the perception of the technical soundness or the due diligence of the work. And then there's the public perception, and there's a gap between the two. Public perception is mostly about thinking about what is the benefit of this technology that's hazardous, and what is the risk. So you say, oh, if commercial airplane travel or automobile travel, you say the benefit is 1,000 times better than the risk. So I'm willing to engage in automobile travel or airplane travel. But nuclear power is still like, oh God, there may be some benefit. We're in this period, right? There is some benefit, but it's not 1,000 times better than the risk. It's about 1 to 1 at the best, right?
Mm.
That the risk and the benefit
That's not the perception of the risk or the actual.
it's the perception.
Yeah.
Because the public works, especially with social media, it's the perception, right? It's not the factual. So you
Yeah.
have this factual, that's the release of the Treaty 80 water, that's 1/7 the world measured, measured concentration that's permitted. And there are many places, many nuclear plants that release Treaty 80 water. And there's the G7 geopolitics can take full advantage of the situation in social media, right? This is what's happening. So we're fighting this perception war, and that's that's a G7. I just call it the G7 or G20.
Well, I mean, I would say okay, obviously China is now making an issue out of this issue.
Yeah, because they can.
because there's political game there, but it's also
there's the opportunity, every opportunity.
But there's no. I mean, I think you put a map out, and I put it on social media as well, where you compare the tritium that China releases from its own plants compared to that.
Right. So there's the back and forth between in the geopolitics, domain.
Yeah, that's also there. I want to ask you on the risk of radiation. Let's sort of start on a technical risk here. I mean, our radiation safety standards. I mean, I've been quite outspoken against linear no threshold. Do you think there's anything technical to change there?
There is, but will it change, and can we change it? Those are two other questions. And
right,
I guess being the age I am, like, will it change during my lifetime? So once it's I'll tell you something. It's we talk about regulatory harmonization and we talk about global standards. When something like low level radiation, linear LNT, is universally accepted, wow, it's really hard to change. Right, like it's a global standard in some respects. It's certainly a global consensus in many respects.
It's interesting. I confronted I had a conversation with the former head of the regulator in South Africa about this, and I said to him, because I was on a public forum, I said, "There's no evidence in my view for this, or no justification, or at least if it is there, it's within the noise," which is what the French concluded in 2006, I think. And then his response was very interesting. He said, "There's no evidence for it, but there's also no evidence against it. Therefore, we go with it." And it was sort of like we are always precautious, And this is sort of what I put at the heart of this whole issue is there's the technical standard, which is we know too conservative. We might not know what the threshold is, but we know it's too conservative. But then, as you say, there's the perception of risk, and that is also miles away, even from where linear no threshold is, right? And we actually have to sort of change both. And I guess your argument is let's work on the perception first before we go change the norms.
Well, I'm just saying that when you consider the social economics or the people, the general public, then the general public makes many of their decisions in life based on whether they realize it or not, on the perception of the risk versus the benefit. And I published this already in 2001. So through my experience in 5 years in Japan, a lot of things happened. So I started wondering, what is the perception of risk is different in each place, and especially with certain topics like nuclear, right? So even today, but Chernobyl was in 86, right? And 3 Mile Island was in 79. Even after 40 years, people tell you today that nuclear, the risk is there's no benefit at all, and the risk is is 1,000 times, 10,000 times bigger. And so there's also this question of when energy ideology, I'll call it energy ideology. Can you talk to the public about energy ideology? And because it looks like from the outside, for example, that Germany made their decision to walk away from nuclear power based on ideology. But that's
Yeah.
maybe a too simplistic a viewpoint. I don't. Yeah, there are certainly more detailed decision um, conversations that have happened. But I was not privy to some of those conversations. So, and France is otherwise also made maybe would you say France has made an ideology based decision about nuclear power? Maybe not. Maybe it's a very practical decision, pragmatic.
Well, it's look. I always say, because I've been in different forms of energy. Energy and ideology can't be separated. National sovereignty, national security. I mean, these are arguments you hear all the time, even though the cost might not be worth. I mean, if they're just cost alone, we would burn natural gas and that's it, right? But that's not how the world works. France after 73 had the perception that it was dependent on oil imports, and therefore it went to nuclear. Now that in hindsight, in the climate debate now, is a good strategy, but it wasn't the calculus at the time. There was actually never an oil crisis in 73. It recovered very quickly after the market was deregulated. So had they stayed with oil, some analysts have shown maybe it's questionable. I mean, because France even overbuilt in their panic, and in the 90s, some of the nuclear assets were sunken costs. And had it not been for European integration, they would have made loss on the nuclear power.
Right.
So, so there was an ideology behind it. I would argue there was also a benefit, coming with it. So, I sort of, I always question these things because the US was in the Middle East for oil. There was no reason from an oil perspective, but that was the perception that there was oil risk. So these things have this interplay to me, and it's it's an interesting conversation.
I agree.
How do you disentangle them? I don't think you can in a certain sense.
Yeah, no, it may be impossible. You have to if one is exercises good judgment or prudence, then yeah, you would realize that you cannot untangle this, right? So, but you said you have. I just want to note your interesting background. There's now a conversation that's not in the forefront yet, but certainly in the background about poverty and energy. So that's very important. I'm not sure that I have talked to some social science professors, and they said you cannot talk to poor people about ideology. They're hungry and they want things that other people do have already, or the rich people have, right? So they want housing, they want clean water, they want energy access, right? That's reliable and dependable. So then ideology is attached to privilege in a way.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the way the poor has been mobilized historically has been through ideological visions, sometimes foolish visions.
Sure.
And for example, an argument in Africa at the moment is we need to use our own resources to develop, which in the case of South Africa comes down to coal. So South Africa is a very resistant country to walking away from coal at the moment. I completely understand it. I mean, I've been in defense of saying South Africa should not do anything in terms of CO2 unless it's a question of cost, because the trade-off for us of not burning coal is much worse than for America, for example, for Canada, right? Which can afford it. And if the technology is available, by all means, let's use what is available. And I've been in favor of this call to nuclear transition, because the way our economy works is that we don't have water. We can use nuclear stations, gas-cooled reactors where the coal communities are, and you can protect them. So there is that conversation there. But how are you going to convince those people? Historically, the poor was mobilized through some kind of vision for the country, if you will. And I think that is the way that it's going to happen. And we're seeing interesting signs now in Europe where the argument in favor of nuclear is not that it's cost more, not that it's better for the environment. The environment stuff is there. It's national security. The French is very strong on this at the moment. This is our pride. This is our nationalism, right? And the Germans are saying, but we walked away from it. We are responsible. We are a cleaner country. So they're using ideological arguments to justify the things. And we're sitting here as engineers and we're like, but guys, this should be cost and baseload and things. It's none of that.
So there is, I think you confirmed that there is a gap between, what the technical engineering and arguments, or the industry arguments, versus the perception, right? So there's a gap. We have to constantly work to narrow this gap. But I guess listening to what you just said, so my campaign, which I haven't taken full advantage of social media, but my campaign is for every developed country or a country that has the educational and the workforce, engineering workforce, to have at least one nuclear power plant. Instead of making the argument, if you don't have a nuclear power plant and saying that you're against nuclear, that um, or that you will never have nuclear, there are many countries that have the engineering workforce and the educational workforce,
Yeah.
and show me that you can have at least operate one nuclear power plant. And that goes for all the 50 states in the US, the 13 provinces and territories in Canada, and many European countries that do not have nuclear power today. Show me that you can have at least one.
Well,
Right.
the argument to your point there is, if you look at where nuclear is being built at the moment, it is primarily in the developing world in what economists would call
Right.
so it's low interest and low fertility countries. So it's countries where women are generally educated, where they have a little bit of savings, but they're not super rich. So South Africa, Turkey, Brazil,
Right.
if countries, Iran, countries of that sort. And one issue they have is a brain drain. Educated people don't find self-actualization.
Right.
And they're looking into nuclear at the moment. So South Africa built one in the 80s already, but they won't
Right.
build one. We want to build another one. Turkey's building another one. Iran is building 5. Maybe they're a bit too ambitious, But be that as it may, that seems to be a good business case for nuclear at the moment. And I would argue in the US, if you look at your internal migration, this is an argument the French have always made. France is one of the few countries in the world where you can be a relatively educated person and find employment in the countryside.
Right.
So there's intellectual pullback from the cities, if you will. Whereas in the United States, even internally, it's often not the case. So I sort of show that nuclear has that capability, that it is something. It's because you see, we're stuck on cost. Yes,
Right.
cost is important, right? But that bigger social argument is not being made, that there's a social benefit to society by having a few brains there, people that can help the kids with the science and the math, for example.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're completely right. I think we're failing to look at some of best practices here in some countries, and we're not following. Because well, as you said, also said, we still, well, I realize that unfortunately we live in the sovereignty of nations is, we live in a dual world, because we have the sovereignty of nations, but you have multinationals who don't really have to follow sovereignty of nations until they get to the limit, right? So yeah, and then we have this third multinational force, which is social media, right? So like how we're connected. Yeah. So
I want to ask you technical specifics on Japan's
sure.
water. Is it only tritium in the water, or are there other radionuclides? So
Yeah. I haven't seen the data, right? So they're certainly measuring the concentration of tritium off the coast, and where they're sampling, and not only Japan and TEPCO, but third parties as well. Um, I would like to see. No, I'm not doubting the work. I'm just saying that maybe the data should be available to subject matter experts who are interested.
Right.
Because an engineer will say no filtration system is 100% accurate, right? Precise in extracting a contaminant of interest, right? So whether it's strontium or cesium, it may be 95%, but why is then an engineer would ask, why isn't it 97%, right? So the devil's in the details, but that's the case. That data is, if it could be shared, maybe it is. I haven't looked recently. That's important.
But would you say, I mean, this is an argument that epidemiologists have always made, which is that if you overmeasure, you see things that you're not supposed to see in a way. Now, obviously, you'd like to measure,
Well,
but what is the frequency or
yeah.
things of that sort.
So what you just said, I was recalling. I looked at the cesium concentration in the body, the research body work for that, or for the cesium concentration. So cesium is a radioactive contaminant that can affect muscles, including the heart. The heart is a muscle, and there was some evidence of laboratory mice where their sleep patterns were disturbed because of a high concentration of cesium, radioactive cesium, in their body. Now, so, but then you have to ask maybe a social scientist to say, or a health manager or a health planner to say, is the disturbance of the sleep pattern a health hazard? And that's margin. It's borderline, right? So yeah. So, but that's at a higher concentration. I just wanted to see
Yeah.
if it was at a how much higher a concentration it was, or how low does the concentration have to be before it disturbs. It has laboratory mice, not humans, right? Laboratory mice in this case. So um, yeah, maybe that's worth revisiting to see what's happened since I looked about 10 years ago at that
Okay.
literature. Yeah.
But you haven't seen anything, I mean, obviously concerning about what's going on over there.
No, I would think. I mean, there are various waste streams, right? So even if they extract um, through ALPS or the other technologies, the cesium and strontium and other radionuclides, um, what's going? How are they going to dispose of that filter that has the high concentration? So you would hope that it would be vitrified. Then yeah. Um, so yeah, I guess as an engineer, I want to see the data, right? Or
Mm.
the world expert, subject matter experts, or those who are interested in looking at, they want to see the data.
And on the so you obviously now have the water being thrown into the ocean or being released slowly, I guess is the better way to put it. But there's also this evacuation area around Fukushima, which is a bit scary. The exclusion zone.
Mhm.
Is it possible to ever resettle that area?
Yeah, they have been. It's been more than 10 years, but they have. It's getting the exclusion zone or the off limits areas are getting smaller and smaller. So, and they've done a lot of. Japan has spent a lot of time and effort and money on decontaminating um, all the public spaces, soils and brushes and forests and houses and roofs. And and over the past 10 years, I went to see some of that. So they have a tremendous amount of low level, what they call low level waste, in these black trash bags, these large trash bags, because the government set a level that's barely above background. Getting back to this thing about background radiation and LMT and so forth. So it's barely above background, but when you set that standard for radiation or contamination to be to be designated as low level waste and just above background, then you have a tremendous amount of waste.
But I was in Ramsar because my wife's Iranian, so I was in Ramsar
Mhm.
this year. I've got a photo. I ate the fruit there.
Yeah,
It's 250 millisieverts. The place is
right,
green. You have massive carp fish. Now, okay, it's not cesium, it's radon. Fair
right.
enough. You can make an argument it's a different
Yeah.
nuclide.
Mhm.
But I mean, surely somewhere the brainwaves must go on and say, but how can you? I mean, that level just doesn't make sense, right? And because that,
It
in my
doesn't.
view, it
Yeah.
enforces a cost that is unnecessary on the society.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess my answer to that is that you cannot over focus on one source of risk. Risk is a spectrum
Right.
of many things, right? So I would be I don't eat fish every day because I would be worried about the mercury concentration in fish, right, from the oceans, right? So as opposed to radiation contamination. So and Well, I guess I can say, being of Japanese origin, you don't eat sushi every day,
Right.
right?
That's
So
what people in France do.
yeah, so so um, yeah, I guess my bottom line is that anything that you do every day can have an impact on your health.
Yeah, but I mean, I compare this to other areas. So in South
Yeah.
Africa, we have an area in Carltonville. It
Hmm.
was at one stage the media called it the Chernobyl of the West Rand, which is the
Hmm.
mines. Because when you
Hmm.
mine gold, you mine uranium with it. Okay?
Right.
And they put uranium on the mine hills around the city from 1900s. I didn't even know there was uranium at the time. And it rained, and it went into the groundwater, and it's radioactivity in the community. And it doesn't seem to me that the people there are bothered by what is going on over
Hmm.
there.
Yeah.
So it would seem to me that the obsession with measuring the risk is
Hmm.
probably inducing more risk in the process.
Right. Right. Yeah. So that's a good point. But uh, my personal opinion is I would rather have the data and see it for
Right.
myself.
No,
Yeah.
that's fair enough to monitor. Could I ask you on Chernobyl? Do you know
Hmm.
anything about that area and if it's also going to be reduced?
Oh no, I don't. I know much less, right? And since you mentioned Chernobyl, we should mention just a tangent, but we should say that because there have been many documentaries and movies, right? Oppenheimer and
Right.
Chernobyl, the TV series. Um, those I just want to say that movies are for entertainment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and it's the director or the artist or it's a team of people that make the movie, their interpretation of so the Manhattan Project actually happened. So it's a director, he maybe he or she may be famous, but it's their interpretation and it's to entertain, right? So it's not actually um, it's it's there's a difference between that and a documentary, although a documentary is also
And,
meant to entertain
and
as
also
well.
you find that sometimes the movie is funded by somebody selling something in the
Right, right,
opposition.
exactly,
The
exactly.
opposite is to scare you basically, so you don't look at the
Right.
technology, right?
Right. So I guess it's just a lesson in cross verifying if factual information, or you have to recognize that this part of the movie is strictly for entertainment, right? So
Mm.
what what they had for breakfast at the Manhattan during the Manhattan Project is just completely interpretation, right? It's not
Mm.
factual unless it was recorded in a book, right? Yeah. So um, yeah, no, I just wanted to say that. So Chernobyl, much less. I know much less because, well, I'm not a
Yeah.
Russian reader and I haven't looked. Um, my information is based largely on images, right?
Mm.
In with respect to Chernobyl. So Fukushima is still a little bit different because I've been there. I've taken my own Geiger counter and I've done the surveying myself of some of the evacuated zones. Just because I was curious on how does, for example, the radioactive cloud, what's the dynamic of the radioactive cloud, and I can tell you that, as expected, forests with leaves of trees that have a high surface area act as filters in a large uh, I guess a geolog or not geological, but environmental sense. And so then with rain, you find the highest measurements, at least gamma, at the trunk of the base of the tree.
Right.
So it's a filtering mechanism that
But
works.
isn't this part of this perception of risk issues that we have this this irrational fear of the radiation as if it's something alien to nature? And here you're explaining that
Yeah, yeah. So
seem to be able to accommodate that.
yeah, yeah. So I I'm not I'm not afraid at all. So I can go back to the LNT and as Alara principles and so forth, right? So um, well, if you measure high level radiation, actually, and you're holding some kind of sensor or a Geiger counter, you are there. You're being exposed, right? So, um, yeah, no, if it goes off scale, yeah, you better turn around as depicted in movies.
Well, as I said to you before we started, my sister was teaching in Fukushima, and the kids at one stage were playing with the counters. They didn't seem to be affected by
Right, right,
these type of things. In the beginning, people were scared, then later on, they seem to adapt. So it seems that they have some
right.
instinct for this. I don't know how to
Hmm.
explain it, but
Hmm.
it didn't. After a while, after the fear wave came through, if you will, it seems that the community was just going on with life as normal in
Hmm.
many ways.
So, mhm.
Yeah.
Any other questions or
Yeah, so I just have a last question to you on SMRs. Since you worked for NukeScale and things. How
right?
far are they from production and things of that sort?
Wow, SMRs in general. I mean, I hope for. I mean, with some of the macroeconomic energy climate change models, like the DICE model that I work with, um, I wanted to answer this question several years ago. That how many nuclear reactors beyond the 440 or so in the world today? How many more do we have to build or construct to make any impact on the 1.5-degree target or 2-degree target,
Right.
right? Under IPCC, and I don't have a precise number, but it's on the order of like 4,000 to 8,000, so 10 times more than what we have today. Uh, with that in mind, then how are we going to get to how many more are we going to build by 2050 or 2030? Right, so 2050 in this case. Um, or even 2100 because the DICE model, I go all the way to 2100. Um, so we, I guess, as stating that, we've spent 150 years, if not 200 years, in the Industrial Revolution in producing CO2. We have accumulated so much. Not all of that is damaging, but we're not at a concentration that where we could be or we should be, right? So SMRs. Yes, I hope many are built all over the world. I hope we get past this conversation of the cost, just
Right.
because it's also in human nature and history. There's always there's always a reason not to do something in human history, right?
Right.
Right. So and we're losing our ability to be human. We're losing the ability to have foresight, right? So I just don't want it'd be scary to live in a world without any foresight at all, right?
Well, and the first of a kind of anything is expensive. So
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Of
I
course.
would I
So
would not be surprised if they go over budget, and then that should not be an excuse to kill it. It should be an excuse to improve it.
right, right. So and then I also I asked the question and done some of the modeling to say, well, how soon after the first of a kind is expensive, but how many do you have to build before the price is half of the original price?
3.
Yeah.
That's my view.
Yeah, so you're right because I thought about four,
Okay. Yeah, I
right?
got.
So we're thinking like it's not. Some people are waiting. Some utility and operators are thinking, oh, well, we'll sit it out. We'll wait until the seventh or eighth is built, and then we see the price that's
Well,
more
my
palatable. Yeah.
view is, and I sort of in on this, is the first guy that gets 10 done is probably going to take over the market, and
Right.
he'll probably be able to displace most coal. Um, I'm not convinced they're going to displace natural gas yet, but the most coal in the world can be displaced, which is a lot of energy.
Hmm.
And depending on the higher level advanced reactors, you might even displace renewables.
Hmm.
That's sort of what my instinct shows on this. So.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. So we're far away in many respects. So and as OECD and OECD NEA, Bill Magwood has said, we need to get back to building because we're losing the know-how and the ability and the confidence in
Mm.
building nuclear power plants, and that's certainly true. So and I would say Korea and Japan, maybe even China, have some of the shortest construction periods. We cannot spend 20 years building one nuclear power plant, right? So uh, I hope that we've learned lessons there. And Okiluto 3 just came online. I remember visiting that site when it was still pouring concrete in 2006, I think.
Yeah.
Right. I've been to Flamanville, and yeah, that's taking some time, right? And the Vogel plant took some time. So we can't, when you have a plant in Japan, Shika Unit 2, that was built in 47 months from the start of construction to when they connected to the grid. That's fast. And we need to go to go to that kind of speed.
Well,
We're counting in months when the plant is built and finished.
if you take France during the Mesmer plan, that 1 year they built 10 in 1 year.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, we had the ability, and we had to repeat some of those.
At one generation, the same people, same language, everything. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Built 1 in 17 years.
Right.
So
I would think that you touched upon France. So France is, for example, I know that they Orano and Framatome, they have offices in Tokyo. Okay. So I would think that connecting it back to Fukushima Daiichi, I would think that with the geopolitics as well, that there's France and Japan are follow each other, or certainly support each other in the nuclear sector. There's really an important role for France in Japan, although it's not, it's far away. But restarting the reactors, starting the conversation about new reactors in Japan, addressing at the same time some of the geopolitical issues, is somebody has to play that role other than the Japanese government. So that's been my latest thinking on that respect. Yeah.
okay. And so just a final question: are you confident that we're going to get this ball rolling soon? Thanks.
Oh, I think when people, I think the answer is yes. So I've been very fortunate to teach the last 2 summers at the Summer Institute. Roughly about 40 mid-career professionals in the nuclear sector from about 40 different countries. And that World Nuclear Association Summer Institute this is 20th year. So there's a substantial number and a coming together of the nuclear industry, because we're small compared to the oil industry, right? So we certainly need to align the financial part, and we can't have 75. I hate to say it, but it's hard to imagine that we would have 75 concepts all being constructed, because if you look at the automotive world or the airplane world, they're less than 10, right? So, and some of them are very specialty, like Ferrari is a specialty automotive manufacturer. So, yeah, we need. I think in a short amount of time, before 2030, right? In the next few years, we need the full alignment of everything: nuclear law, nuclear financing, construction times and expectations, the concepts, regulatory approval. We need to be practical in this complex approach, right?
Yeah.
To make decisions and go forward. So, as you said, with France, overbuilding is okay now. We need to overbuild, right? So 10 reactors in 1 year is wow, that's tremendous.
Well, my view has been then the only way to do this. It's actually already happening in France, I think, and it will happen it's happening in South Korea and even Russia. It's quite one I think now. You just need to eat mass production. You need to build, get good at it, get good at it, and keep the same design over and over, and then eventually you get it down, as you say, and then that's it.
Yeah, just this week, just Wednesday this week, I was in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I heard a gentleman from Philippe Bossy from CEA, speak about the French nuclear plan over the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
It's very practical. So happy to see that is being that practical view in the decision making is going forward. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Okay. Well,
Mhm.
Professor Akira, I'd like to thank you very much for this
Yeah,
kind
thank you.
podcast. And everyone else, please share. And yeah, please continue posting the stuff on LinkedIn. I enjoy it. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
thank you very much. Thank you.